I'm photographer David duChemin, and this is Vision is Better, a sometimes weekly podcast about the craft and art of photography. Welcome here.
Hey, welcome to another episode of Vision is Better. I'm your host, David duChemin, and I realized that yesterday I went off on a little bit of a tangent. Some might even call it a rant. And if you know me, I mean, that's kind of what you get. However, I also understand that all this artsy-fartsy stuff without, depending on where you're at in your growth as a photographer, some of it without some actual practical kind of stuff is a little, is less than helpful. And so it's kind of like, you know, fueling a machine, but not telling you how to drive it. And so I wanted to talk today because today is the third day in the big 5-day deal. Check out the show notes for more details on that. There's a huge photography bundle that's sort of being sold off by the part of the photography community. It's a really great deal. But as I said yesterday, instead of kind of making it a big, you know, everything must go kind of sale, we also kind of wanted to make it at Here at Craft and Vision. We wanted to make it a bit of a celebration, and every day we're posting a new video. All that to say, today is the third day, and so today I want to talk about 3 things that you can do, practically speaking, to create more engaging photographs. Now, if you'll forgive me, I'm occasionally going to look up at the monitor because I've had, as many of you may have noticed, I've had terrible issues with this camera locking focus on my face. If you watch the YouTube videos little bitty small, it will be less distracting than if you watch them on your full screen and you just notice that the background's in focus and I'm not. So once in a while I'm going to look at the screen and just kind of touch it. So just carry on, nothing to see here. So 3 things that you can do to create more engaging photographs. The first thing that I'm going to suggest is that you go deeper. And several years ago I wrote an ebook called A Deeper Frame, and you're welcome to check that out on the Craft and Vision site. It's only $5. But regardless, some of the stuff in there, the reason I talk about going deeper is because if we can give depth to our frame, not every frame needs depth, but in the real world, we live and move in a 3-dimensional world. When we make a photograph, we collapse or flatten that 3-dimensional world into 2 dimensions. And in order to recreate the experience, the experience of depth, we need to intentionally engage in with certain techniques. So I'm going to suggest, first of all, that you just understand that going deeper can be, though not always, a great way to increase the engagement of your photograph. How do you do that? Well, part of it would be with lines. For example, if you have a lot of horizontal lines through your photograph and you move to one side or the other and you turn those horizontal lines into more diagonal lines, those visually will pull people into the depth of the image. The vertical line that goes up and down that draws people from the top of the frame to the bottom of the frame, or horizontally from left to right, is great. And there are photographs where you want a sense of serenity, where you want balance and like a passive balance. And those lines will do that. But if you want something that's more engaging, that pulls people in for the right kind of image, having a diagonal line that pulls to the middle of the frame is really helpful. Combine that with a wider angle lens. If you've looked at my work in the last 5 years, I used to favor longer lenses, and especially for portraiture, but over the last 5 years have become much more intrigued by the engagement that I feel with a wider angle lens, because it creates the possibility of greater depth. You still have to know how to use it, and probably using wide angle lenses would be another topic for an episode of this. But if you combine the shift, physical shift, the creation of diagonal lines with a wider lens getting closer, you exaggerate some of those and you pull people deeper into the frame. The other things, of course, would be adding a second element. So you may have something really strongly in the foreground, but putting something of interest in the background creates front to back interest. I realize it's a 2-dimensional frame, but we still talk in terms of foreground, background. There is a front and a back, and if you intentionally position front and back elements, foreground and background elements, so that they have a certain draw from front to back. So you look at the front, then you look at the back, and there's a relationship between them. That also creates depth in your photograph. So there are lots of ways to do it, including using depth of field. If you use really shallow depth of field, there will be, while that isolates and is its own effective device, you may also want to consider adding a little bit more depth of field, because that creates greater depth of interest in the photograph. So if I can't see what's in the background, I'm more likely to disregard it entirely. There's no information there. There may be even no impact. So I just look at the foreground element. But if I increase my depth of field to the point where it doesn't have to be crystal clear. It doesn't have to be f11, but if you increase it, say, from f1.2 to f5.6, you will get enough there that I will now look at the background element with greater interest. There will be more visual mass there. So that would be one way of doing it. Second thing I want to suggest is that you increase the contrast in your photographs. If you want to create greater engagement, increase the contrast. Now, the obvious thing there would be to increase tonal contrast or color contrast, and you can do that too. But my suggestion here is that you increase the conceptual contrast, the contrast of ideas. Because if you have just a beach and you just photograph on the sand, that is less interesting than if you have the shore breaking on the sand. That introduces elements of story. It introduces visual interest. And where there's visual interest, there's emotional, or the potential for emotional engagement. So add something. If you're photographing a young child, for example, adding something that contrasts with that young child, either something textural, so you have this smooth baby skin and you photograph it on, I don't know, something, a piece of bark. That's a terrible idea. Someone out there is going to prove me wrong and do it really interestingly. But as an example, the piece of bark is harsh. And in fact, if you see a lot of nude photography, some of it is done very, very well. Not all of this doesn't apply to all of it, but some of it done very well has the very smooth female body against something that's much less smooth, that's maybe mechanical or less organic, or is rough as opposed to smooth. So those are the contrasts I'm talking about. You might, going back to the example of the child or the infant, I have a photograph where I was with quite a young little boy, and he was cuddled up to his grandfather, and it's the contrast of those tiny little hands and his very smooth, innocent, childlike faith in the context of his grandfather's embrace, where you get the rough, big hands compared to small, subtle, soft hands. So those kinds of contrasts are engaging for us. We find juxtaposition interesting. They might contribute to the story. They might, like in the work of Elliot Erwitt, they might be funny or witty, but they're engaging. And if you increase the contrast conceptually, as well as with color depth and tonal contrast, you will increase the engagement in your photographs. So that's the second thing I want to suggest. Third thing I want to suggest is that you change your POV. One of my ebooks, I said, if you want to change my perspective as a reader, and I talk about reading photographs more than I talk about looking at photographs, because I think it's a more active engagement, and that's what I hope your photographs and mine will be. People will read them and engage with them, not just passively look at them and glance over them. But I said, if you want to change or affect my perspective, you have to change yours. So standing up higher than you might normally photograph from, or getting much lower. It's why I love these new mirrorless cameras with the LCD screens, that I can shoot much lower without getting into a funny position, without drawing attention to myself. Sometimes I want to shoot almost right at water level. I don't want to have to get in the water to look through the viewfinder. So get low, get high, change your perspective. It will change every line in the photograph, but it will also change potentially the way that people feel about your photograph. It'll change the interest, because they may have seen one scene from eye level a million times, but never seen it or considered what you're asking them to look at from a different perspective. So if you want to increase, if you want to change the engagement that your photographs have, change the perspective, go higher, get on a ladder, go much lower, look at it from the less obvious perspectives, go behind it, whatever it is, get behind it, go under it, go on top of it, explore it visually. That's what's going to get you not only seeing more creatively, but making photographs that people maybe had never considered before. And people are curious by nature. If you give them something that's different, that maybe even is a bit of a puzzle, they have to figure it out, you introduce the element of mystery, perhaps through a different POV, perhaps through your lighting, and you keep things a little bit more in shadow instead of revealing everything. That also creates engagement. So if you want to do something with your craft. Yesterday's rant was about making it more personal and that sort of thing. It's about engagement, and if you want to increase your engagement, these are 3 things that you can do: get deeper and create greater depth in your photograph, explore things from a different POV. And increase the contrast in the photograph, particularly conceptually. Give me something to chew on. Give me something to consider. That will make my experience deeper and make me want to come back and look at those photographs. And if you want hints on increasing the contrast and you want to study juxtaposition, I can't recommend anyone higher than Elliot Erwitt. Check his work out. That was a combination of check him out and take a look at, and it just got all burbled. Check out the work of Elliot Erwitt. You can find his stuff online through a Google search. Really beautiful use of juxtaposition. I love his stuff. But I think if you look at most of the compelling, iconic imagery from the last century, especially documentary kind of stuff, look for contrasts. It could be size, it could be big, small, it could be textural, it could be man-made versus natural, it could be wet versus dry, it could be smooth versus rough, all kinds of young versus old. It doesn't have to be like verses in the sense of there's a conflict. Just a contrast is enough to engage on us. Please check out the show notes today. The show notes. Check them out today. Please follow the link to the 5-day deal and this ultimate photography bundle that's being sold. It really is fantastic. If you purchase through the links that are in the show notes, it gives me an opportunity to give back to some incredible organizations. Of course, they're affiliate links. I make something on it, but we're shuttling 20% of that to some great organizations and to my own pro bono work. Check some of the stuff out. There's over 70 hours worth of video. There's over 700 pages worth of ebooks. If you're watching this in the future beyond September 15th, 2015, then unfortunately that doesn't apply, but you can still go to craftandvision.com and get some excellent deals. But even without buying a single thing, those 3 things that I just mentioned will help you create more engaging photographs. Remember, gear is good, but vision's better. We'll see you next time.